Hey guys, Effie here. Today I'm going to make this card using our Gardenia Wishes 6x6 photopolymer set and our modern plaid background stamp. So I'm going to be doing some watercoloring with our Gardenia Wishes cluster. So I have a piece of A2 size watercolor paper which I've dusted with some anti-static powder, and then I'm just going to ink up my cluster stamp with some clear embossing ink and stamp that watercolor panel using my Misty tool. Next, I spooned on some of our rose gold embossing powder and hit the whole panel with my heat tool, getting this beautiful rose gold embossing. Now I'm just going to use some Ken Oliver color bursts to do some wet and wet watercoloring. I started off by wetting the area of the big bloom with some clean water first, and then I dropped in bits of cadmium red color bursts towards the inner portions of my petal. Then I took a separate medium or large tip water brush and I blended some of that color out to the edges of the petal. Now this is me applying my first or base color. After I have that foundational color on this bigger gardenia, I'm going to go back and just add deeper concentrations of the same cadmium red color burst to the inner petals. And this is just going to give my gardenia a little bit more depth. So I just have the pigment on a fine tip water brush, which I apply to the florals, and then I have a medium or large tip brush that I use to blend the color out. Once I'm finished with this bigger bloom, I'm going to move on to the smaller gardenias. Now this blue that I'm using, it's a combination of indigo and cerulean blue, and I just mix it up in one of the empty wells in my watercolor palette. And I'm just applying the same wet and wet watercoloring technique to this smaller bloom. Before I applied any pigment, I wet this smaller bloom with some clean water first using my medium tip brush, and then I dipped that fine tip brush into my blue mixture and I added that blue mixture to the inner petals and blended that color out with a medium tip brush. For the other smaller bloom, I kind of started painting with a little bit of Orchid color burst, and I wasn't a fan of how that was coming out. So I just went back with the whole area of that floral and just added that blue mixture. But I did like that blue and purple combination. So after I added that blue mixture down and blended it out, I went ahead and added some purple or orchid to the florals or the petals while they were still wet. So I have this two-tone look for these two smaller gardenias. And actually at this point, my florals, I felt that the red and blue contrast was a little too stark. So I re-wet that red or cadmium red bloom, and I just added some orchid color bursts to some of the inner portions of my petals, giving even this larger gardenia a two-tone look. So you have that base color of the cadmium red, and I'm adding just a little bit of shading and contrast with the orchid, and it gives this bloom a more dimensional look. Next, I'm just going to apply some Terre color bursts to the foliage in this cluster. For some of the leaves, I did add some of the clean water, and then I added the Terre, and then I blended the pigment to the edges of the leaves. For the smaller leaves, I just went ahead and added the Terre color bursts to the entire leaf. Occasionally, if the pigment was a little too dark, I did take my larger brush and I blended some of the color out. But usually at this point in the painting process, I usually make quick work of the foliage because I kind of just want to finish painting, die cut this, and get it on my project. So at this point, I set my panel aside to dry, and then I cut out a piece of light lavender cardstock. This panel is slightly smaller than A2 size. Dimensions are on the screen. Next, I brushed on some anti-static powder, and then I stamped our modern plaid image right onto my lavender panel, and I used my Baren tool to help me get a nice, smooth, even impression. Once I stamped the modern plaid with some embossing ink, I poured on some clear embossing powder and hit the whole panel with my heat tool. And now I have this beautiful tone-on-tone modern plaid background, which I'm going to mount my floral cluster upon. So next I took the coordinating die for our Gardenia wishes and I die cut the cluster, and while that was running through my die cutting machine, I created a side folding A2 card base from white cardstock. Once I took the die out of my machine, I just carefully peeled the die away, and my panel wasn't completely dried, so uh, when I tried to get some of the tape off, it actually pulled some of the painting away. So I just went ahead and filled in the areas that got ripped away with that tape. Not a big deal. I adhered that modern plaid background onto my side folding A2 base, and then I just glued my floral cluster directly onto the base with liquid adhesive. Then I stamped this "Thank you so very much" sentiment from the same Gardenia Wishes set in our Caviar hybrid ink onto white cardstock, and then I created a fishtail banner. Next, I glued this one directly onto my card base as well. Sometimes it's just easier to get it all on the card base. Bing, bang, boom, done. But we're not completely done. I have to add some of our glass slipper sequins in varying sizes, and I just applied them in visual triangles all over the front of my card. And my card is now complete. I hope you guys enjoyed today's project and video. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel because I update it on a weekly basis. Thanks for stopping by, guys. I will see you next time.